So 12 years ago, I'm sitting in a meeting with my mentor, with my coach at the time, a guy who had just taken a liking to me. And I was in a really rough place at that point. I was living in the back of the van. My fiance had just left me. I was super in debt and I really had no skills to help me move towards my goals in life. And I remember sitting in that lunch, that meeting with him, and he said something that at the time it hit me really hard in the ego, hit me hard in the feels, and I kind of rejected it at first. But over the years, over the last 10 years or so, I've only seen what he told me in that conversation prove true time and time and time again as I've had access to more and more successful people. I regularly get to hang out with some of the most successful people in the world, whether that's content creators, it's entrepreneurs, it's leaders. And I've just seen what he said in that meeting given new context over and over again. And I want to share this with you in today's video. This is going to be a long one. But effectively, what he told me is something that Einstein had said, which is that the quality of thinking that got you here will not get you to where you want to go, right? So the quality of thinking that created the problem is not going to be able to solve the problem. And so he told me, you have to fundamentally change how you think about yourself, change how you think about the world, how you think about anything. And that was such a strange context for me at the time. I was like, what do you mean change how I think? Like, sure, I might have these blind spots and maybe I need to learn more. But what he was suggesting to me is that I needed to completely reprogram my brain to think entirely differently. And so over the next couple of years, I was just really fortunate to have him in my life, holding my hand, guiding me in this reprogramming process. And today, what I want to do for you is exactly what I do for my coaching clients, which is to not just help them build big, awesome businesses by giving them systems and frameworks that they can plug into their business and then, go and make a ton of money and maximize the return on life, all that great stuff. But really, it starts with, to build a great business, you have to first become a great entrepreneur, right? You can't have a seven-figure business without also having the skills of a seven-figure entrepreneur. And the very first thing in that process then is to change how you think, to change how you analyze problems, how you work through problems, and how you come up with solutions, how you not only think actively through a problem or a situation, but also how do you program your mind so that it's always working subconsciously in your favor to manifest the dreams that you have, to pull them into your current reality? So what I want to do in this video today is going to be a long one, so buckle up. But this could just be the most valuable video, not just from a making money perspective, but to change the quality of your life. Because here's the crazy thing is, in the beginning, when I was dead broke and I was in that van, I thought money was the root of my problems. I thought the fact that I didn't have money, the reason I was in that van, all this debt and like all that stuff, I was like, if I just had money, that would solve the game. It would solve everything. And as I made money, it solved a lot of my problems. Like, don't get me wrong, money doesn't solve all your problems, but it does solve all your money problems. And then it leaves you with the bigger problems of life to solve, the questions of meaning, of fulfillment, and all this other stuff, right? And what I've discovered time and time again then on my journey is that it all comes back to how you think. That the quality of your thinking is going to dictate the quality of your life. And so in this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to break down first how not to think. This is how 99% of people think. This is how we've been trained to think in school, how society expects you to think about the world. Then we're going to talk about, well, how to actually think. First, we're going to talk what not to do, and then I'm going to outline what to do differently. Then, once you know how not to think and then how to think, we're going to focus on what to think. That is, what should you be actively thinking about on a day-to-day basis to help you move towards your goals. Then I'm going to outline some of the most powerful mental models. This is something that we're going to talk about up here in the how to think section, but one of the distinguishing characteristics of the most successful people I've had the pleasure of hanging out with is that the 1%, they think in frameworks and mental models. I'm going to break down what exactly that means, but I'm going to share with you 5 of the most powerful ones that I see recurring over and over again. Then we're going to talk about the dangers of thinking. This is really important because thinking ain't easy, and you're going to put a lot of time and energy into it. And if you're not careful, that thinking can lead you astray. It can be incredibly dangerous. It can be a weapon for mass destruction if we're not careful. Then we're going to talk about turning what we've learned into day-to-day tactics, an activity that you can deploy on a day-to-day basis called thinking time. This is going to be very powerful. This is going to be the big takeaway that I want you to go and implement into your life as homework. At the very, very, very end, I'm going to share with you the most powerful thought of all. So let's dive in. Let's talk about how not to think. We need to rewire our brains, because ever since we were in school, the school system teaches us a particular way of navigating problems. It teaches us what's called convergent thinking. Convergent thinking is the type of thinking that says there is one solution to this problem. If you follow the formula, 1 plus 2 equals 3, A plus B equals C. If you do the steps, if you execute them in the right order, you will come to the right answer. And so school forces us to memorize facts and formulas and theories, and then it forces us to regurgitate that. So the ability to cram this information in your brain and then to produce it on a test or in a quiz or in an impromptu raise your hand if you have the answer to this question, that's what's rewarded. But the truth is that what we're rewarded for in school, we are often penalized for in life. And what I mean by that is the most powerful thinkers, the people who are ahead, the 1%, they're not thinking convergently. They're not trying to converge on the one right answer in a situation. They are instead divergent thinkers. See, divergent thinking recognizes that there is not one right answer. There is simply a multitude of answers spread across a spectrum of probabilities from good to worse. That's it. And so this is the type of thinking that entrepreneurs engage in every day as they're trying to make trade-offs and decisions about, do I do this or do I do that? What are the pros and the cons? Because there is very rarely a cut and dry answer. If there is a cut and dry answer, do this, then that, and then you get this, then it has been systematized into a machine, and then all you need to do are plug in cogs to execute that machine. I'm not trying to disparage employees per se, but that's the idea of building a business that has a replicatable process. If you sit here in your work cell and you do this work in this way, that's the IBM way, the Apple way, you will produce this product, the Apple product, right? If you're a cog in the machine, though, you are replaceable. And so you don't have much value in the world. As you go up the levels within a business and up the levels towards this 1%, you'll notice that these people are rewarded disproportionately for their ability to think divergently and to then execute good judgment. Because as Naval Ravikant said, in an age of infinite leverage, judgment is the ultimate superpower. And judgment is nothing more than the result of clear thinking executed with intention. That's it. So we need to recognize, first of all, that if there is a single solution to a problem, knowing the answer is actually not that valuable. Knowing how to find the answer is. And in a world of Google, of AI search, pretty much any convergent thinking has the marginal value of it is zero. Because it doesn't matter how complex the formula is that you give me, I can plug it into AI, I can get the answer, right? Knowing what the formula should be or how to derive the formula or in what situations to use the formula, that's where divergent thinking comes in. And that is what we're going to be rewarded from. So that's the very first thing. We need to reprogram our brain to recognize that all the facts that we've been stuffing into our brains isn't very helpful. What is helpful is the ability to take multiple ideas, multiple data points, and then combine them new and novel ways. That's what creativity is. And creativity is the heartblood of divergent thinking. It's the ability to say, well, I have this thing and they have that problem. What if I was to combine this in this new unique way to solve their problems? Huzzah, right? So that's the first way not to think. And that's a really hard one because it's so programmed into the way that we see the world, thanks to the fact that we've been thinking like this since we were little kids. The second way not to think is as a shallow thinker. The truth is, most people do not know what they think on a topic because they've just spent all their time reading headlines. They do not have a deep, well-considered opinion on geopolitics, on different scientific breakthroughs, on ethics, on history. They don't have that. They have the headlines that they've read, and that's about it. They are what I call lily pad thinkers. Lily pad thinkers, if you think about thinking, your biological brain is this really lazy evolutionary adaptation. Your brain's only goal is to keep you alive long enough to procreate, right? And so over the centuries, over the millennia, your brain's only objective is how do I expend as few calories as possible while exposing you to as little risk as possible so that you can pass on your genes to the next generation. Huzzah, I've done my job. What that means then is your brain is not incentivizing you to think deeply, to go below the surface on any particular thought. And so your brain will be this scatter shot of multiple thoughts concurrently occurring inside your brain at any given moment. And I call this the monkey mind, right? The monkey mind is constantly swinging from branch to branch. If you've ever tried meditating and sitting still for like 5 minutes at a time, your brain will just try to run away. And meditation is the process of like trying to harness that monkey. I'm going to teach you a system for not just harnessing that monkey, but how to take it by the hand and actually guide it from point A to point Z so you can get deep, meaningful insights around a topic. But for most of us, we struggle on this because your brain is just not incentivized to go deeply. In a very real way, thinking deeply to focus on something requires a lot of calories, a lot of energy, a lot of intention, and a lot of courage. Now, that last bit, like that's surprising, right? Like to think deeply about something requires courage. And I share that because from an evolutionary adaptation perspective, again, like when you're on the savannah, thinking deeply, getting lost in thought and going really deep on a particular idea that exposes you to the risk of being ambushed, right? You're distracted from the things that are happening. And so your brain is always trying to keep you on this high surface level of attention to a million different things. But you will never think deeply about something while you're dispersing your attention across 1,000 different things, right? You need to focus it like a laser onto one particular item and go deep on that. Most people they just pop around the lily pads of life. They never go beneath the surface. They never swim down to the bottom of the bank, to the pond, and see what's down there. And I'm telling you, down at the bottom of the pond is where you find all the pearls. So, how not to think number two is don't be shallow. Third is don't be reactive. Most people never think deeply about something until it's posed to them in a moment where they have to think about it. And then what they will typically do is they will just go to the sound bites or the headlines that are the most memorable in that moment to them, but they won't have necessarily given it really any deep thought. So if I ask you at dinner, hey, what's your thoughts on abortion? What is your thoughts on um, universal basic income, right? You might in that moment, because nobody's ever asked you that question, and because you've never really stopped to sit down and think deeply on that topic, you will just come up with a reactive answer. You'll just say what feels right in that moment. You'll probably talk in circles. You'll spiral. It won't be concise. Everybody will walk away going, I get the gist of what you said, but it didn't influence me. It didn't persuade me, and it didn't necessarily leave an impact on me. And that's because you're reacting to the question and you're thinking in the moment. The way to overcome this, to think like the 1%, let's move over here to how to think. The difference, one of the biggest difference, is that 1% thinkers are incredibly proactive. They're putting the time and energy before anybody asks them the questions. They're asking themselves the questions. And they're not just going about the motions of it. They're thinking deeply. They're collecting information. They're trying to put it together. And they're trying to come to an actual opinion on what they think. The best way that I have found to do that is through the act of writing every single day. So writing to me is the most powerful form of thinking. It is thought made physical. It is taking the chaotic jumble of your thoughts, that monkey mind, is holding it by the hand, is forcing it to go from A to Z in one contiguous motion, right? And because it's so slow and laborious and your monkey mind is constantly trying to escape you, most of us find writing to be incredibly difficult. And we get to the end of it, or we get into it and we're like, this is just so frustrating. I suck at this, because school taught us to write to a word length rather than writing to find actual insight, right? If the assignment was write me a 20-page report, but you got the insight on page 2, school teaches us just keep babbling about it. Just keep babbling. That's not necessarily going deeper. You're just mucking up the water even more. But writing, I have found to be the single best indicator of a deep thinker. It's surprising to me, guys. This is not just correlation. I believe it's causation. That the best thinkers are also the best writers. That the most successful 1% of the population are actually fairly incredible writers across the board. Even if they don't identify as writers, their ability to coherently communicate their thoughts in an impactful and influential way through the written word is much higher than 99% of people. I think that there is not just a correlation, but a causation. I think the act of writing makes you a clearer thinker, makes it more likely that you're going to be able to articulate your perspectives in an influential, impactful way when the time comes. So, if you're not already, you should be picking up a writing habit every single day. I think it's the easiest, lowest hanging fruit way to increase the quality of your thinking. Now, let's talk about, well, I guess I already did right, intentional and proactive, but proactivity is so important. We're going to put it here. And when we get to the thinking time exercise down here, I'm going to show you how you can build a routine into thinking proactively. It's going to be really powerful. Now, the other way that 1% thinkers think about the world is they are not waiting reactively for the opportunity to think about a topic, right? Somebody asks them, what do you think about this, right? And they're not then in that moment reacting to that question by recreating or trying to come up with some deep insight without first overlaying on top of that some kind of mental stencil. And what I mean by that is the best thinkers are the ones that have this robust toolbox of frameworks and mental models. These are nothing more than a lattice work of mental frames that you can take the question, take the thought that you're trying to wrangle, put it within that context to see it from different perspectives, different angles. And the more angles that you can see an idea or a problem from, the more likely you are to come up with a creative solution, an insightful solution, or an impactful solution. So very first thing that I see when I'm talking to somebody who's pretty damn successful in business, if we're trying to work through a problem, they don't just start from square one. They say, okay, how can we apply this mental model to that? And just like that, you've created a border around the picture. You've created a border around the problem. So it's not this esoteric, ephemeral, chaotic, unwieldy thing you're trying to wrap your mind around. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but when I'm trying to think about something deeply, if I don't have a pen and paper or a framework to work from, it feels impossible to get my head around it, right? And that's why having a second brain, actually taking the thoughts around that topic and dumping it out into a second brain can be really powerful because now you're creating bounds, right? Constraints are a powerful thing when it comes to thinking clearly. You don't want to try to think inside of an infinite playground, infinite sandbox. You want to cage it in and say, this is the bounds in which I'm going to work on this problem. Otherwise, you just get lost in all the potential, all the possibilities. So next is the best thinkers, the 1% of thinkers, they spend an inordinate amount of time in deep thought and in deep flow. And flow is a very interesting psychological state, right? You've experienced this when, your sense of time disappears, you lose your sense of self, you're so in the zone, you're so locked in that work becomes effortless and you look up after like 2 hours, you're like, whoa, how did I do that, right? That is when the deepest, most powerful thoughts come to the surface because in that state you're really turning off your prefrontal cortex, the newer part of the human brain, right? And it's instead going to the back part of your brain, the limbic system, where it's more of the prehistoric reptilian subconscious part of your brain, which accounts for 80% of the thoughts that are occurring inside your mind at any given point. And so being able to tap into that subconscious framework is incredibly powerful, but it's incredibly difficult. Now, if you want help with that one, I actually put together everything I know about like unlocking the flow state on command into a course that I put out a couple of years ago. And I've had 3,000 people go through it, never had any complaints, 5-star reviews, never had any single refunds on it. It's like $50. You can go to hyperfocusmasterclass.com, go sign up for that. That will teach you literally everything that I know. And I had to learn this one the hard way because I have severe ADHD. And I understood that like if I was going to have any hope of being successful in life, like as my mentor was telling me, I had to think differently. That means I had to learn how to take control of my brain and use it entirely differently. And understanding the mechanics of unlocking the flow state was a huge component of that. So go check that out. Now, The last thing that thinkers are remarkable at, like the 1% thinkers, is environment design. So there are different environments that are conducive for different thoughts. This is a crazy thing. Nobody had taught us this in school. I was almost 30 years old before anybody ever suggested to me that maybe the place you should go do creative work is different than the place where you should go do your administrative work or your editing work, right? I was a writer and nobody ever told me, "Hey, you should go somewhere else to write and somewhere else to edit," right? Never even crossed my mind. Once I started diving deep into the science of flow state, though, what I'd started to discover is that there are different environments that engage different parts of the brain. In particular, one area of the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, which is critical for creative thought, it lights up when you're in a completely different, novel, beautiful, inspiring location. So being outside, being high up where you have a big view, being next to the ocean or being in the mountains, these locations, they will ignite a different part of your brain, which then helps you be more creative. So that's a great place to go if you want to be more creative as a thinker. Now, if you want to be more analytical as a thinker, being out next to the ocean is not a great place to do analytical thought. I'm sorry, you need to like put the blinders on like a horse at the tracks, right? You need to put yourself into a closet so you don't get distracted, so that your brain isn't lighting up with creative thought, because you need to think deeply about what is directly in front of you. That right there, understanding the power of changing your environment to change the quality of your thoughts, is a massive unlock. It never crossed my mind until I was nearly 30 years old, and that is when like a lot of things started changing very rapidly in my life for the better. So let's move on. Now we know how not to think and we know how to think. But what do we think? Right? What do we actually spend our time thinking? And the first idea I want to suggest to you is that thoughts shape reality. Your thoughts shape your reality. This is crazy. But it shouldn't be. But if you think about it, if you take a step back, you realize that your entire experience of the universe is occurring right now within the 3 inches between your ears. That's everything. You are literally the center of your universe. And so when somebody's like, "Oh, he thinks he's the center of the universe," you are. You are the center of your universe in the same way that they are the center of their universe. You have no perspective outside of this singular viewpoint of the world. Your interpretation of the data that is coming into your brain right now, it's completely personal to you. One of the questions you might wonder is like, how do I know that your perception of the color black is the same color or the same perception of black as mine, right? Because dogs see a different color, birds see different colors, right? They see ultraviolet. They have an experience of the universe that's completely different than ours, not because they see they're living in a different universe. It's because they're able to access and see things that we cannot see. And so the thing I want you to take away from that is to realize that the thoughts that are going through your mind right now shape the reality that you experience. And you can intentionally craft your thoughts to craft your reality however you want. And I know that sounds hoo-ha, it sounds like The Secret. And honestly, like I'm not a hoo-ha, secrety kind of guy, but this is, if I had to delineate and say what is the number one characteristic of the 1% thinker versus the 99%, it is that the 1% know that they can shape their reality through nothing more than their thoughts, their beliefs, and their actions. And it starts with the thoughts. It starts with the base source code that's playing through your mind at any given moment. And so the question that you have to ask yourself is, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about? Are you thinking about things that are empowering you, or are you thinking about things that are limiting you? Here's the crazy thing is I would hazard to guess that the majority of people in the world are currently thinking limiting thoughts, and they don't even realize it. Because as Orson Scott Card said, we believe we question all of our beliefs except for those beliefs we truly believe and those we never think to question at all. Most of us never question the thoughts that are running on a loop in the back of our minds over and over and over and over again. And the reason for that is something called myelination. The reason you never stop to question it is because your brain does this really unique, interesting, really cool thing actually. When you have a thought, there are different parts of your brain that are going to light up. These little things called neurons spark. First time you ever have a thought, all these little neurons. The first time, it's actually quite difficult for these neurons to connect with each other. Like one fires here, one fires there, and they're like, how do I get over to my buddy? And the way that I would think about this is if your friend moved to the other side of town. So a side of town that you've never really been to specifically, but you know the general area. The first time you go to his house, it's probably going to take you a while. Maybe you take a left turn when you should have taken a right. You're looking around. You're like, is that his house? Is this his house? Right? It's taking you longer to navigate to a place that you've never been before. And that's how your brain operates when you have a thought for the very first time. It feels really foreign. It feels really awkward, right? The more you have that thought, though, the more you go to your friend's house, the easier it gets to get there because you have these little road signs, these mile markers along the way. Oh, when I get to that grocery store, I turn left and then I turn right. And slowly but surely, the more you go there, the more refined the path. Until at some point you have located the fastest point from point A to point B. And now when you go to your buddy's house, instead of it taking 15 minutes, now it takes 11 minutes. Same thing happens inside your brain. The more you have the thought, the more you go visit that friend, the easier it becomes for those neurons to find each other. Because they're like, oh, I know how this works. I go over there and then over here, right? They create this neural network. Now, here's where it gets really crazy is at a certain point, when your brain has had a thought so frequently, your brain says, well, I wouldn't be having this thought if it wasn't important. So I should do something to make this thought easier to have in the future because maybe it's vital for my survival. So then what the brain will do is it will take that neuronal network and it will cover it in this fatty substance called myelin. This is why your brain is like, if you look at it, the gray matter, right? It's covered in myelin. Myelin is like fiber optics. It takes the neuronal pathway and it speeds it up by a factor of like 1,000. So now if it was initially taking you 11 minutes, like 15 minutes the first time to find your friend, by the time you got it optimized, now it's taking 11 minutes, fiber optics come in and now it only takes you a minute. You can practically teleport there. Here's why it's important is your brain does not actually distinguish how true a thought is. And this is a very important idea that we're going to get to when we talk about the dangers of thinking. Thoughts are not true. They are not true. And your brain cannot distinguish that. Your brain doesn't care about that. It just says the frequency in which I have this thought makes it important. And so it will code that neuronal pathway in myelin that becomes a rut. Your thinking literally becomes rutted, okay? Now, here's why this is important. Most of us have limiting thoughts going through our brains at any given moment. Most people are telling themselves this narrative about I can't do that. I'm not this type of person. That's beyond me. I'm scared. I'm shy. I'm not a people person. We have all of these limiting thoughts that are playing through our heads constantly. And your brain is reinforcing it, making it easier every time you have that thought to have it a subsequent time, a second, a third, a fourth, fifth time. So when you go to reprogram your brain, it's actually going to be incredibly difficult. It's going to be hard because you've spent your entire lifetime ingraining this thought pattern, these limiting thought patterns. And so what you have to do is you have to, with intention and with ferocity, start to transform and rewire your brain through intention by holding empowering thoughts always. Now, here's why this is going to feel awkward to you is because you've probably never given yourself permission to be your own biggest cheerleader. You've never given yourself permission to be your own biggest cheerleader, and yet you've gone your entire life being your own biggest critic. The thing I see separating the 1% from the 99% is they do not spend time criticizing themselves. They do not spend time putting themselves down. They are constantly lifting themselves up in a way that to other people looks like arrogance or overconfidence. Now, arrogance really comes down to whether or not you think being better that you because you move through the world in a particular way that it makes you better than somebody else, right? Assuming that you think highly of yourself, but that it doesn't make you better than anybody else, that's not arrogance, okay? And what I want to encourage you to consider is that empowering thoughts are the bedrock upon which you are going to build the persona, the individual, the characteristics, the habits, the beliefs, and the actions ultimately of the person who's going to be able to create the life of your dreams and pull it into your current reality. If you cannot hold empowering thoughts in your mind at every moment, if you cannot recognize a limiting thought and then say, no, that thought has no power here, I will not consider it, I will throw it aside. If you cannot do that, you're going to have an incredibly hard time being successful in life because you will constantly be self-sabotaging yourself in the place that nobody else can enter. It's inside your own mind. And this is why I encourage you to stand guard at the gate of your mind. Be careful what information you consume. Be careful who you let into your garden, because if you let pessimistic, cynical, frustrating, angry people into your environment, if you let them into the garden of your mind, that is going to manifest in the way that you think. So going back to environment design, make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who are optimistic, who are positive, who are constantly seeing the best in the world, that want the best for you, and that see nothing but potential, abundance, and opportunity in everything. Because whether or not you see opportunity or an obstacle, it's simply a matter of perspective. The 1% are always seeing opportunity because that is the empowering thought. And so the question I want you to ask yourself whenever you have a thought is this thought serving me? Is this thought serving us? Not, is this thought true? Because we don't care. Thoughts don't have to be true. Like, it doesn't matter. We are holding the thoughts only that empower us, that make us better versions of ourselves. And so that starts with auditing, becoming very aware of the narrative that's going inside of your head, and then creating a proactive journaling process where we write every day down the thoughts that we want to be programming into our brain. That's why affirmations work. It's not because you're pulling some kind of magical abracadabra act on the universe, right? It's simply that you are reprogramming the way that you're thinking about the problems, about the opportunities in your life, which then activates parts of your brain like the reticular activating system, which then makes it more likely that you're going to see those opportunities out in the world and take the correct action that would help you move forward. Because who's more likely to ultimately move towards their goal? The optimistic person who believes anything's possible, that takes action in spite of the overwhelming odds, or the pessimistic person who holds himself back, who says, you know what, there's like 98% certainty that project is going to fail. Therefore, I'd be better off just saving my time, my energy, not even trying. Who's more likely to succeed? Yeah, it's the person who takes the shot, who actually goes for it. So that is what to think. Empowering thoughts constantly. Now, another thing to think is questions. Questions are a very interesting thing because your brain is, if you think about this in a very interesting way, your brain is nothing more than a question answering machine. That's it, right? I'm hungry. What should I do? Go get that. How do I get food? Go kill that thing. I don't have a way of killing it. What should I do? Take that stick, make a spear. Okay, now what? Throw it at it. Cool. You just keep coming up with questions and problems and then answers, right? You give your brain questions, it will give you answers. Now, here's what's crazy about the brain is the brain is really good at connecting dots that don't always connect. And so it doesn't necessarily give you true answers. It gives you answers. It will always create an answer. It will always answer asked questions, whether for good or for bad. You got to be really careful here. And so you need to be intentional about the types of questions that you ask. Ask better questions, you will get better answers. Therefore, you will take better actions more in alignment with the reality that you're trying to create. So becoming a master at asking your brain questions and eliciting your subconscious brain. Say, for example, writing down before you go to bed, if you have a problem that you've been stuck on, you can't solve it, and you want to recruit, the 80% of your brain that is floating around in the background that you can't necessarily access through conscious thought, write it out in the journal right before you go to bed. The problem very clearly that you're struggling with, ask your brain to solve it for you, go to sleep, and then in the morning, before you do anything else, just pull out the pen, start writing in the journal. Don't write consciously, just start stream of consciousness writing, and you'll be really surprised to find what your subconscious generated for you in the meantime. So become a master of asking questions. Your life will improve for the better. Now, that's what to think. Let's talk about some frameworks here with the mental models. You'll notice I left this part blank. That's a little bit of an engagement thing because I wanted you to stick around to this point. Now, if you have stuck around to this point, could you just do me a favor, hit subscribe and leave a comment about what you found to be the most useful so far? What did you like? What did you hear? What did you need to hear? And let's talk about some mental models. There's tons of mental models. I did one of my favorite videos that I've ever done on the main YouTube channel. That's Anthony Vicino's YouTube channel. If you haven't, go check that out. Is a video called 5 Mental Models to Think Like a Strategic Genius. And in that, I use chess as the frame from which we could take examples to create a stencil to put across other problems or areas of our life. Really fun activity, right? But I was using more esoteric mental models in that you probably have never heard of. But the thing is, in life, it's more about finding what's true, not necessarily what's new. And so instead of giving you the most esoteric mental models and stacking on top of, the hundreds of others that you already have, I want to give you what I believe to be the 5 most valuable mental models that I use the most frequently and I see recurring in the most successful people uh, over and over and over. So, first one is rightly first principles. First principles. And I apologize for my handwriting. I have the handwriting of a monkey. Okay, first principles thinking simply says if it doesn't violate the laws of physics or the laws of reality as we know it, then it is possible. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is what are the first principles, the fundamentals that are limiting by what are the fundamentals of physics that are limiting the problem that I'm currently trying to solve? And going all the way to that basic. And you'd be surprised, just going through this mental exercise, you start to realize a lot of the things that you would, on first glance, just deem as being impossible or improbable. You start to realize, well, actually, it's not. It's just difficult, right? And there's a big difference, obviously, between something being impossible versus just being difficult. The classic example of this that everybody cites these days, so I might as well do it too, is Elon Musk. Elon Musk, when he set off to found Tesla, which, back when he did this, electric cars, the big issue with it was simply battery costs, like the resources that were available at the time to create battery systems for a vehicle that large that could hold a charge, that could deploy it, and give you a reasonable amount of range. They were both incredibly expensive and incredibly heavy. And Elon looked at the situation and he goes, I don't understand why these batteries are so expensive. And so what he did was he went back to the first principles and he said, what is a battery comprised of? Well, it needs this element, it needs some of that element, and some of this element. And he says, well, okay, well, how much is it to go buy those elements? And it was like, oh, that's like 1/20th the cost of the batteries. Okay, well, how much would it be for us to take those elements, then buy them and then put them together ourselves? Well, then that would only be like 1/10 of it. And so then at the end of this whole process, he comes up with a battery that is like 1/10 the cost of what was already on the market. And he did that because he didn't accept that batteries are this priced. He said, well, why can't they be this price? Why does it violate the laws of physics that we can make a battery for less? No. So he did it. It's crazy to think that you can just do stuff like that. But I mean, if it doesn't violate the laws of reality of physics as we know it, you can do it. And that's really powerful. So ask yourself, the mental model here is what is the first principles of this situation? Does it actually violate the laws of physics? Is it possible? Is it not? What would need to be true? That's a fantastic question. What would need to be true for this to happen? Next is if we have first principles first, then rightly, second should be second order. I'm going to write this horribly. Consequences. Second order consequences. So in chess, the example here is if I make this move, you make that move, then what? What is the second order consequence? So I looked at this from first order. I make this move, you make that move. Then what if I make this move and you make that move, right? Second order consequences. You go beyond just the original reaction to the thing that occurs. If we do this, what happens downstream? What are the unintended consequences or effects of this decision that we might not see yet? And the way this might play out in business is, hey, if we hire more salespeople, then will that bring in more sales? Yes, but the second order consequence of bringing in more salespeople is now you have more people to manage and communicate with. And Metcalfe's law says that the power of a system expands proportional or squared to the number of nodes in the system of communication. So when there's just two of us, we just communicate back and forth. Bing, 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 really quick, really easy, right? If we add another node to the communication system, three people, now I got to communicate with you, I got to communicate with them, they got to communicate with that other person, and then we all got to communicate, right? So just like that, we went from just you and me communicating to like 6 different communication systems, right? Add another node to that system, we bring in another higher, that system gets even crazier. So what that means, the second order consequence of, hey, we need to bring in more sales, therefore we need to bring in more salespeople, is, hey, do we need to bring in more sales managers? Or am I the founder, the entrepreneur? Am I going to be the one that has to manage this now even more chaotic, more difficult system, right? If you don't consider the second order effects of that, then you're going to run into issues. Now, another second order effect of bringing in more salespeople, not just communications, but what if they succeed? What if they actually do bring in, like, we're going to double our salespeople, and now you triple, like somehow you've tripled your sales, right? Okay, do you actually have enough product to fulfill? Do you actually have enough people on the fulfillment side to deliver? Do you have enough cash in the bank to manage the working capital for the inventory to be coming in, right? Second order effect, you have more sales now coming in. What happens on the back end, right? And if you don't think through the second order consequences, you will be very surprised to do things and then realize you broke something else way worse than the initial problem. So, second order consequences. Third, and this goes to the divergent thinking up here. This is all about probabilistics. Probabilistics. That is terrible. I am so sorry. We do not live, I believe, in, well, do we live in a deterministic universe or not? Does that, like, is it possible to predict, if you had a powerful enough computer with infinite computational capacity, could you predict all of the different interactions of different molecules, different atoms, of different individuals, to be able to predict what exactly would happen? Well, I would posit that if you had that, you would be God, right? That's omniscience. God is omniscient. He knows exactly what is all going to be happening at all different times because they have the ability to calculate the location, the speed of every single molecule in the universe, and to know how they're all going to interact into perpetuity. And I'm sorry, but that is just not possible in any current, outside of spiritual magical divination, type of understanding of the universe that we currently have. And I'm not saying if you have a religion that you're wrong or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, within the current known physics of the universe, that's not possible. It's not possible because a machine capable of that level of computation, well, let me give you another mental model, actually. It's the map is not the territory. Map is not the territory. And so what this means, and what you're seeing in real time, by the way, is I have not scripted this out. I'm just talking extemporaneously, sharing these ideas that I've gathered over the years of working with some of the top 1%. You make these connections because you've thought deeply about all of how they all connect, right? So to have a system that is capable of computing every single molecule inside the universe, you would run up against an idea, which is the map is not the territory. So a map is a representation of an area. If you think about the map of Europe, you have a map that gives you a general idea of where things are relative to each other. But that map can, by definition, never be exactly precise. Because in order for it to be exactly precise, it would have to be an exact replica of the territory. And therefore, the map would have to be literally the size of the territory for it to have the fidelity to be able to say that is exactly what's happening. And then therefore the map would not be useful, right? Because if I wanted to see how long it's going to take me to get from, Berlin to Cologne, I don't want to pull out a map that's literally the size of Berlin to Cologne to figure that out, right? It would defeat the purpose. That map is a symbol, but is not the territory. Therefore, going back to this idea of the infinite computational machine that could, calculate every movement of every atom, it would have to be the size of the universe itself. So is the universe deterministic? Perhaps, if the universe itself is omniscient. That's a fun question. That's a different topic. That's spiritual. We'll get into that another day. Anyway, the thing to understand, though, is whether or not the universe is deterministic or not. For your purposes, it is not. And that is where it's the most useful, right? So what the universe actually is, in your perspective, is probabilistic. It's not deterministic. What that means then is that there is a range of likely outcomes given a scenario, given a certain number of inputs. There is a range of likely outcomes. Your ability to think, not convergently that there is a right or a wrong answer, but divergently that there is simply a spectrum of right and wrong answers along a spectrum of probability of occurrence. Being able to calculate as an entrepreneur, if we do this, if we take this marketing initiative, there's an 80% likelihood that it will lead to this outcome. You can never say that it will be 100% certainty. So you need to understand what are the probabilities of success or failure. What are the likelihoods? And this is something that we talk about a lot in a tool that I use called the decision journal. A decision journal is a formalized process for thinking through really big, deep, heavy, meaningful, impactful decisions, right? Most people don't have a process to think through the big decisions in life, and therefore they just make decisions on emotion. The problem with this is that is no way to go through life if you want to increase the quality of your thinking, of your decisions. So I created this little template called the decision journal. If you want to get that, leave decision in the comments and I'll have somebody hook you up with a link to that. But effectively, one of the questions I ask inside of that template is, what is the probable outcomes of the decision that you are currently considering? And it could be 60% likelihood it will be successful, which means there's another 40% we need to account for. What occurs in that other 40%? Well, 60% likelihood this occurs, this occurs, this occurs, and we get to 80% of our goal. Cool. 20% likelihood that we actually exceed our goal. Huzzah. 10% likelihood that we fall short of our goal. Okay, cool. So given, well, that's not 100%, that's like 90%, right? Let's say another 10% that it goes catastrophically wrong. So in that example, there's 100% certainty that something will happen. There's 60% likelihood that it will be good, but not, fantastic, great. Okay. There's 20% likelihood. What was it? Do we say 10%? 20%. 20% likelihood that it'll go great, and 10% that it'll go badly, and 10% that'll go horribly. So really, when you're looking at the 60% likelihood of outcome, it's actually 80% likelihood that it's going to end well. Only 20% likelihood that it's going to end catastrophically or below standard. Therefore, that's a decision you should probably take, right? But the ability to look and assess and determine probabilistically what's likely to happen is a superpower. Now, here's the hard part is, how do you actually put numbers to things? Like, you're just throwing a dart at the board, right? Like, well, how do I know a 60% likelihood? That's where having a coach, having a mentor, having somebody further along on the journey who has seen the patterns play out over and over and over, say, hey, I've been there, I've seen this, I've coached others on this. And when they do this, it usually 6 out of the 10 times, it ends like this, right? So one of the most powerful things that I've invested into over the last 12 years of my life has been coaching. And I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on coaches to be able to bring to you guys in these videos the distilled absolute best of the best lessons that I've acquired. Now, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a business that's doing at least $10,000 a month and you would like help actually taking that business to $5 million a year, you would like a coach, somebody to hold your hands, give you systems, processes that you can plug into your business, hold you to a higher level of accountability, to give you the mindsets and the tools, the frameworks that you can deploy inside your own life to become the 10.0 awesome best version of yourself. Well, I'd love to help you. Go to Beyond the Apex, beyondtheapex.com, and you can apply for group coaching with me. I run a very small group coaching program. I'm very selective with who I allow into there. Again, you got to be doing at least $10,000 a month. But if your goal is to get to 5 million, I can help you with that. Go to beyondtheapex.com, apply for the program. If it's a good fit, I'll be in touch. We'll have a good conversation. If not, keep consuming this free content. I put a lot of energy into this, and I hope it brings you a ton of value. If it does, let me know down in the comments. If it doesn't, I don't know what you're still doing here. You're a crazy person. But anyway, okay. So those are the first 3 mental models. First principles, second order, consequences, probabilistics. Next is via negativa. Via negativa. I learned about this one reading Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile. The idea here is simply, I don't have enough space to write this, so I'll put it up here. Addition through subtraction. A lot of times when we want to do something, when we have this goal, this target in the future, we often think first about what we need to start doing that we're not currently doing. What are the habits or routines? What are the activities I need to be executing every single day that would get me to that goal? When the reality is that you would often make more progress instead of asking, what do I need to start doing? And instead ask yourself, what do I need to stop doing? What do I need to remove from my life? What are the bad habits? What are the bad activities, the bad sucks of my time? What are the thought processes that I'm currently engaging in that are limiting me, right? Instead of thinking, how do I add more empowering thoughts? First, you'd be best started saying, how do I remove the limiting thoughts, right? They're like the emergency brake of your life. And if you're sitting here just trying to hit the accelerator, but you never release the emergency brake, you're just going to burn out the tires, you're going to burn out the engine. So no bueno. So via negativa is the ability to look at the situation. Instead of asking, what more do I need to do? You ask yourself first from the position of what do I need to take away? What do I need to remove from the scenario that would allow me to move forward faster? One of my favorite quotes of all time, and I don't even know if it's true, it's apocryphal. But somebody asked Michelangelo, hey, how did you carve the statue of David? And he said, it's simple. I just removed everything that's not David. It's the perfect example of addition through subtraction. Very powerful mindset. And I love this because it makes it a whole lot easier to hit your goals because instead of asking yourself, what do I need to do? You start from the position of what do I need to stop doing? So if you want to lose weight, instead of being like, I need to get into the gym, maybe what you need to stop doing is eating ice cream every single night. Maybe I need to stop drinking every night. If you want to get better sleep, maybe it's I need to go to bed on time. Like instead of staying up really, really late, like I need to stop binge watching Netflix until 11 p.m., right? So ask ourselves, what do you need to stop doing? The last mental model is inversion. And you'll have noticed that I actually started this entire video with inversion. That's how powerful this is. So, inversion, I got this from Charlie Munger, the late great business partner of Warren Buffett, who passed away a couple of years ago. He was very much a mentor of mine. I hold him in very high esteem. And he was a big fan of this mental model. He would say, invert, always invert. And what that means is take the problem, the goal or the situation that you're dealing with, and then flip it on its head and ask yourself, if I was to try and achieve the opposite of this, what would I do? And so when I framed this entire video, you'll notice that I started to reprogram your brain to think like the 1%, I inverted the problem. And instead of telling you how to think, the first thing I did was I told you how not to think. Because I know that if I wanted to make you a bad thinker, to think like the 99%, I would tell you, don't think deeply on anything. Be a shallow thinker. I would tell you to think convergently. I would tell you to memorize everything and regurgitate headlines. I would tell you to wait to think about a thing until you've been asked about the thing. That's how I would set you up for failure if I wanted you to be a 99% thinker, right? So inversion is taking the situation, flipping it on its head and say, how would I make this the opposite of this goal be true? So if you want to lose 15 pounds, but you don't necessarily know how to do that, well, you could invert it and ask yourself, well, if I wanted to gain 15 pounds, what would I do? Well, I'd eat ice cream every night. I would stop working out. I'd sit around a lot, right? I'd overeat all the time. And quickly you have this list of things that you know if I do that, that would take you away from the goal, the anti-goal. And so then all you have to do is invert it again and be like, well, then I guess I shouldn't overeat. I should probably get rid of the ice cream. I should probably move more. I should probably exercise, right? It seems really simplistic in the example that I'm giving here, but I'm telling you, in the more complicated problems of life, inverting is often the way to see it from a new angle that your brain that allows your brain to penetrate the problem. Because when you run straight on into the wall, sometimes you don't realize that if you were just to walk 20 feet to the right and try to come at it from the other side, you would realize, oh, I could just walk around the wall. Like there's a door on the other side. So we gotta figure out by hook or by crook how we can get inside the building, and sometimes going around to the back door and coming in is the easiest way. So let's talk about the dangers of thinking, because now you're starting to understand how not to think, how to think, what to think, and some mental models to start deploying. But the truth is that thinking is very dangerous, which is why, like, when an authoritarian regime, a dictatorship takes over, one of the first things that they do is they try to subjugate what you think about. They remove books and literature that allow for expansive thinking, right? I just read a book, reread the book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. I did a book review of it on the YouTube channel here, so go find that. But effectively, Napoleon Hill is in interviewing the devil, and the devil is saying, hey, the way that I enslave people is I get them to give up their ability to think for themselves. And so when you think for yourself, it's very dangerous because you're going to be flying contrary to the opinion of the 99%. And that puts you at odds with your friends, your family, your relationships, because most people don't think this way. They have never engaged with any of these ideas. And so the very fact that you're here, that made it this far into a video, tells me that you run the risk of, being in danger of being alienated and being alone and not feeling like you belong. And I'm telling you that one of the best things you can do is get into an environment, get into a community of people who think differently. Get yourself into a mastermind, into a network and a community of other entrepreneurs who think like this, because that is the surest way to help you continue leveling up. I'm telling you, 1% of people sounds very small, but that is a lot of humans. That is a lot of humans to go and make friends with. Now, it might be very difficult for you to find them in your hometown. You might need to go elsewhere. You might need to join like an online group or something like that. But I'm encouraging you, don't go this journey alone. It's much, much harder than it needs to be. Now, dangers of thinking. Let's talk about going back to this idea, limiting beliefs versus empowering beliefs. Your frequency is what you frequently see. If your mind is tuned into the radio station of the universe, which is constantly playing negative, pessimistic, cynical, angry songs, then you are going to be the person who is always singing cynical, pessimistic, depressing, frustrating, angry songs. If you are constantly tuning into the radio station where it's always like the happy-go-lucky, the life is good songs, that's what you're gonna see in the world, right? This again, the reticular activating system. So be careful what you allow your radio station to be tuned into. Frequency is what you frequently see. Number two, the risk of ideology and groupthink. You are a 1% thinker, which means you have no place for ideological thoughts or groupthink, no political affiliations. If you are reciting a political affiliation, a stance that other groups of individuals also collectively could recite themselves verbatim, then you have not thought deeply about the situation. You have not formulated a unique personal opinion or thought on it. You are simply regurgitating. You are a mouthpiece for somebody else's thoughts. This is one of the risks of religion and of politics, is that they encourage groupthink. This is how we all think about this thing. I'm not saying that's bad in and of itself, because their ends might be pure. I'm telling you that if you want to be a 1% thinker, you have to think all your own thoughts, and you have to come to them from first principles, from second order consequences. You must arrive at them yourself. And so do not just buy into the narrative that your pastor, your priest, your elected representative is feeding you. Get outside the echo chamber, do the research for yourself, and discover what you think on the topic for yourself. Finally, and again, like I mentioned this one before about thoughts aren't true. This is very important. Your thoughts are not true. They are just cycling through your brain largely as a reflection of the thoughts that have been implanted into your brain from when you were a child. A lot of the thoughts, the self-critical ones in particular, that are in your mind, that are telling you you're not worthy, that are telling you that you're not good enough, that you'll never succeed, that this is too far and beyond your ability, those are not your thoughts. They are thoughts that your parents, your teachers, your other adults in your life, other kids in your life, your friends, your peers, your boss at work, they have implanted those thoughts into you. They are not yours. But because you allowed yourself to live within that frequency, it's not your fault. You were 6 years old. Your parents told you that these things, right? They ingrained it from when you were very young. Your parents might be great. They did this because they love you. They didn't mean anything by it. Remember, the 99% are not doing this with intention. They're not thinking with intention. They're not executing any kind of game plan with intention. And yet, the downstream effect of this is that your mind is filled with thoughts currently that are not true, that do not serve you, that are not yours. And so, I encourage you to consider that you have the ability to rewrite your narrative. You literally have the ability to write yourself into existence by changing the narrative of the thoughts that are playing through your mind on any given day. Even if those thoughts are not currently true, I'm telling you, give yourself the identity, plant those seeds, and they will become your reality. So maybe you are not currently 150 pounds of pure muscle at 10% body fat, but you tell yourself that that is the person you are, so that you are living and breathing with that alignment, that identity, rather than saying, I'm fat, I'm sluggish, I never go to the gym, I can't keep my word, I sleep in, I hit snooze, and all that stuff. Change the thoughts that are playing into your mind, even if they're not true, because I'm telling you, you're already thinking things that aren't true, and they're hurting you, so you might as well flip the script. and adopt the thoughts that serve you, that empower you. So careful, because thinking is incredibly dangerous. Now, let's talk about an activity that you can engage in every single week called thinking time. I got this from Keith Cunningham. Keith Cunningham wrote a book called The Road Less Stupid, and you probably have no idea who that is, and yet I would hazard to guess that a large percentage of my audience, if you're watching this, you've probably heard of, if not read, the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. Well, Keith Cunningham is the rich dad in Robert Kiyosaki's book. He never mentions him explicitly by name, but that is literally the rich dad that he's referring to. Keith Cunningham is like an OG. He's absolutely brilliant. And he posits that one of the most powerful activities that you can do is this thinking time activity. You sit down once a week for an hour, you pose a question to yourself, and then you just sit still and you write for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, however long you want to set the timer for. The key here is that you're not censoring, you're not editing yourself. You're just free flowing, letting the thoughts flow, putting them out there, and then you can come back to them later and see what came out. Now, the way that he frames this, and I think this is incredibly potent, is that you've already paid the stupid tax in life. The goal is not to pay the stupid tax more than is necessary. And the way that you can milk the lessons from your failures is by actually sitting down and making time to review and assess what went well, what went wrong, what did you think, and all that stuff. Now, three different places that you can do thinking time. Again, nature is a powerful one because, as we talked about earlier, it fires off the ACC, right, the anterior cingulate cortex. So as you go out into the nature, your brain lights up, has more creative, more expansive thoughts. That's incredibly powerful for thinking time. Second is meditation, and I know, like, I have ADHD, so I get it. Like, you're probably gonna have a difficult time sitting still for more than 5 minutes because your monkey mind wants to run away. It is that process, though, of sitting with the monkey mind, trying to guide it slowly and corral it so that it wants to come and sit with you rather than trying to run away from you. That is where some of the most potent thoughts that you can have will arise. Because as that monkey mind is jumping, he will constantly try to jump around the thoughts that he doesn't want you to have. He'll keep trying to tear you away from that. But the process of bringing it continually back to the problem at hand, the question that you posed for yourself at the beginning, that is where you're going to refine the muscle of staying below the surface so that you're not just remaining a lily pad thinker. Last is the shower. Now, Anuj and I were talking about this a while back, actually. There's some really interesting theories around why such deep thoughts can occur inside the shower. Beyond the fact that it's just a really nice, soothing place. It feels good, right? It's nice and quiet. You're away from your phone, so there's not a lot of distractions. There's also like really interesting research and ideas around just the frequency of noise that occurs within a shower is on the same like wavelength, same frequency as binaural beat, right? So it's white noise. And so these things, they put your brain into a different wave state, right? So delta versus beta versus alpha wave states, which can be really conducive. So what I'm suggesting here, again, going all the way back to the beginning of this, is with environment design, we think very carefully about where are we putting ourselves when we want to do different types of thinking. If we want to be creative, what are we doing to get into nature to elicit the ACC? When we want to be more editing, we want to be more critical. Where are we putting ourselves in environmentally to make that more conducive? So these are just a couple of different ways: nature, shower, meditation. Obviously, nothing new and profound there, but incredibly powerful. Again, it's what's true, not what's new. So we've come a long way. How long? We've been here for a bit, right? So if you stayed this long, I'd be curious. What did you pick up? What'd you like? What'd you learn? Put it down in the comments so that we can reach out to you and say hi. I'd love to connect and see what you actually found useful. But to bring this full circle, I want to leave you with what I consider to be the most powerful thought of all, and something that Shakespeare said: "Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so." Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And this is probably the number one difference that I see in the 1% versus the 99% in terms of like the way and what the quality of the thought is. The 1% of people that will find success in life are the ones that will take the external events of life and they will interpret them as opportunities. They will interpret them with the best of intentions. Rather than attributing to malice or bad luck, they will look at things in their environment that are occurring and say, this is happening for me, not to me. How can I grow through this rather than just go through this? And they look at everything and recognize this isn't good or bad. It's my interpretation of it. The problem isn't the problem. How you think about the problem is the problem. And if you look at it and you say, this is a problem, then sure, just the language that you're using there is problematic. But if you look at it and say, this is a puzzle, there's an opportunity to solve something, to learn something, to be creative and trying to solve this thing, that's fun, right? Or if you say, this is an opportunity rather than an obstacle. The thing that stands before, and I think this is what Ryan Holiday, the obstacle is the way. This is like the pillar of Stoic philosophy. The obstacle is the way. And the things that you're going through, the thing that people might label as bad right now, might in fact be preparing you to be the person who's capable of receiving the things that you claim that you want for yourself in the future, right? Who do you need to be? What characteristics, beliefs, habits, strengths, skills do you need to have as an individual to be able to receive the life that you want to have for yourself? And if you are not where you want to be right now, it means that there's a deficiency, there's a lack. And so the thing that you might be experiencing that some people might call bad, it might be good, in fact, because it is preparing you, it is giving you the opportunity to grow through that and be able to ultimately receive the thing that you want the most. So that is the most powerful thought of all. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Thank you, Mr. Shakespeare. I don't know what else he did for us, but that was a good one. Anyway, okay, so that's it. That's all I got, guys. That is how to reprogram your brain to think like the 1%. Take this, run with it. Let me know what you liked, what you hear, what you find the most valuable. I'll see you guys in the next one.